Hello. This is the first lesson in the sixth fetter. And the sixth fetter is about boundaries. It's about the subject and it's about the object. It's about the delusion about the both. So it's about boundaries. It's about that it seems as if there's a subject here and there's an object out there. I would like for you just to look out your window or look at something that's in front of you right now. And you can feel into your body and you can feel that it feels as if there's somebody in here, the subject, that is looking at something outside that is the object. You can feel it in your body. You can feel that it feels like there's a push-pull, that it's like the eyes are latching onto something on the outside. And when you look at it, that starts to change. Right? Well, in the sixth fetter, we're going to give you lots and lots of exercises that are both dissolving the object out there, the way that you perceive it, the way that it seems to be, because the way that we see and we perceive everything outside of us is not exactly how it is. There is nothing out there. The second thing is that, as we already talked about in the previous 5 fetters, there's no one in here to perceive it. When you look at a wall or when you look at whatever you're looking at just before, that what you're looking at does not need a you to be experienced. It is enough that it is experienced. There doesn't need to be a you, a separate self, to experience whatever it is you're looking at. And if what I'm saying now is starting to give you a feeling of unease and a feeling of discomfort, then it's quite normal. It's quite normal. And that is why this lesson I'm going to talk specifically about boundaries, because what a lot of people experience is that when they they've done fine all the way through first fetter, no separate self, I'm aware of that. Second fetter, no trauma, fine. Third fetter, with all the things we do not to feel the emotional triggers that we have. We do different things to avoid feeling into that. That's the third fetter. All the wants, all the things that are outside of us that we want, where we believe that our life can be improved if we just get that. If we just have that instead of what is in my body right now, everything would be so much better. And the fifth fetter is about if everything that I don't want out there will be different, then I won't feel like I'm feeling right now, and then everything will be fine. So you might have sorted all that out. All of those 5 types of identification might be sorted out. But then you come to the sixth fetter. And then I'm sitting and talking about that there is nothing outside of you, and there is no you that is perceiving. And if you start to feel scared by that, it's because there's still things that needs to be done in the second fetter. There's still trauma in you regarding boundaries. If you have not had clear boundaries, if you never taught clear boundaries as a child, if you multiple times in your life have experienced that your boundaries have been crossed, either physically by violence or sexual abuse or anything else where your outer boundary has been crossed, or if your inner boundary has been crossed with, psychological abuse, emotional abuse, intellectual abuse, spiritual abuse, where your boundaries have been crossed, in the inner boundary has been crossed, or if you have experienced a life where you've been gaslit so many times that you don't even know what it means to say that there is a separate self. You might have experienced that was like the easiest for you because you never had a separate self. If either of those scenarios is the case, then the sixth fetter is the one that is putting the stick in the wheel for you. Because dissolving boundaries is going to trigger memories about your boundaries being crossed. And your body is not going to allow it. Your body is going like, no, I'm not doing that. I know what will happen. You will have so much fear or so much anger when you start to work with the sex fetter, if you have boundaries issues. So therefore, I would like today to talk about boundaries. I would like for you to be very, very clear on what your boundaries are before we move on and start to dissolve the subject-object. So as children, we don't have any boundaries. Boundaries is part of our socialization. It's where we are taught what is okay and what isn't okay. So if you have grown up in a dysfunctional family, or if you're grown up with parents where one or both had issues about boundaries, then you've never been taught what healthy boundaries means, which means that you have a full life of experiencing other people crossing your boundaries. But it goes both ways, because since you do not know where healthy boundaries lie, you can't respect other people's boundaries either, which means that you are not only the victim when it comes to people crossing your boundaries, you're also a perpetrator. And both sides needs to be looked at, felt into the body, and then really staying with that in your body, how it feels in your body when you're in the situation, and see if you can pull yourself up to the 5th floor, as the anthropologist, and look at the situation where either somebody's crossing your boundary or you're crossing another person's boundary, and really, really look at it with compassion. Because you've never been taught about your boundaries, you have inherited how you set up boundaries in your life. And that is when it starts to become quite predictable, where we either have no boundaries at all, or we're putting up walls instead of boundaries. And there are different types of walls that we use. I'm going to talk about those in a minute. But it's not an either or. It's not either you don't have any boundaries or you have like walls instead of boundaries, or you have super healthy boundaries. Usually it's a mixture between all of it. And that's why everything we talked about in the second fetter is going to come into good use now. You really, really need to be compassionate with whatever you experience. And that's also why all the exercises we have done so far, where you go from the head, from everything you think about the situation, you can't use that for anything anymore. You haven't at any point. But at this working with the sex fetter, it's very, very clear that you can't use your head for anything. No matter what you think is reality, it's not. It's not. If you look outside the window now and you say there's a tree and there's a house and there's a car and there's a man walking a dog, all of that is not what it actually is. And in order to really understand that and unpack the sex fetter, you need to have a very lived experience of your boundaries. So the sense of self needs to be sorted. The sense of no self needs to be sorted. Self-care for no self needs to be sorted. And then we can start to work with the boundaries. And the only way you can work with the boundaries is if you go from whatever you're looking at on the outside, from a thought, what is happening outside, into a sensory experience in the body, where you can see, hear, taste, smell, or touch. And that is what you leave it at. Whatever thought you have about what you're seeing, or what you're hearing, or what you're smelling, or tasting, or touching, whatever thought you have about that, that is another layer, that is part of the thought realm, and it's not a sensory experience. That is a fantasy. It has nothing to do with reality, with what is in your direct experience. And when we work with the sixth fetter, it's very, very much about your direct experience all the time. So in order for you to do the sixth fetter and do the exercises, you need to be okay with being in your body. You need to be okay with your body as it is. You need to be happy about your tummy and grateful for your thighs and enjoy the weight you have and nurture it and take care of it. Because if you don't, this is going to be a very, very difficult fetter, at least the way that we work with it. Because we work very much with embodying the fetters. It's very easy to bypass the sixth fetter. Very, very easy. Because it's just looking at the object out there, the subject in here. I know there's no I, which means that there can't be anything out there. It can just be a perceived out there. Done. Six fetters fallen. But that is not how we work with it. We take the opportunity to really feel into boundaries. What does that mean to have a boundary? What does it mean to have a boundary crossed? How does that actually feel in the body? And if you have had a life and you have had lots and lots of experiences with your boundaries being moved all the time, you have no idea what we're talking about. So you need to get into the sensory experience in the body. And it's also the part that we really want you to notice what is happening in your body. And when we talk about the body yes, body no, that is very much in use here. And it has to do with the amygdala in the brain. Sense if a threat is happening. When somebody's crossing your boundary, the amygdala sense that threat. And it's releasing hormones that is in line with the body sensing a threat. And that is giving that very, very clear body sense of, no, I don't want to do that. And that is what is happening with the body yes, body no. That it becomes very, very clear if this is a yes or if this is a no. And if you haven't got any exercise throughout your life regarding the boundaries with feeling what is okay and what isn't okay, you have no idea. You have no idea. So if you have experienced having your boundaries violated, whether it's physical boundaries or sexual boundaries, emotional boundaries, intellectual, spiritual, psychological boundaries, if those have been violated, the sensory experience of that, the memory in the body needs to surface, and you need to allow yourself to sit with it. And what you do is simply that you feel like a contraction in the stomach, instead of starting to create stories about what this contraction is about, and it's about my mom and my dad, and it's about all those stories are irrelevant. It doesn't matter what happened, and it doesn't matter if you can remember, if you can't remember. The only thing that matters is that right now in your body there's something happening, and that you need to stay with. It's also funny that whenever something is happening in the body, whenever we just, we're out of here, into the mind, into the story, going to psychotherapy for 10 years, talking about the stories, and nothing is healing in the body because everything is in the head. That is just crossing another boundary. It's super, super disrespectful to turn your back to somebody that needs you, that needs your attention and needs for you to be there. That's super disrespectful, and that is basically what you've been doing. And if that is what you've been doing, now is the time to, whenever something is happening in the body, that you allow it to be there. Just sit with it. It takes 7 seconds for you just to sit with it and not add another thought to it, not add another story to it, but just allowing whatever happens in your body to be there. Can you be in a body where you have constricted breathing? Can you be in a body where it feels like you got, melting iron in your stomach, or it's freezing cold? Can you be in your body where you hardly can breathe? Can you be with all that? Because it's not about the story. It's about how it makes you feel right now. The story is just there to give you an indication of what neighborhood it is we're in. Oh, it's about physical abuse. okay, let go of the story, stay with the body. How does that feel in your body? And that is what we're working with the sex fetter, really feeling into the boundaries. So the way that we work with it when we talk about boundaries, we talk about that there are like 3 layers of boundaries. And the outer boundary is the distance between me and them. It's all the exterior things. That is where, if you have experienced physical abuse, where somebody has, touched your body or hit your body or punished your body, taken your stuff, gone through your diary, taken your phone, read messages on your phone without you saying okay, leaving a mess around them, jumping in line in the supermarket, picking up your cucumber from your basket, not respecting time. You have an appointment, they're late, not respecting your time, smoking without permission, anything that is, encroaching the outer boundary, and are doing that without permission, touching different parts of the body without permission. Anything that is happening on the outer between you and other people that is happening without consent. Boundaries is about consent, obviously. So anything that is happening on the outside where your boundary is being crossed because you haven't given consent to that line being crossed. Whenever that happens, feel into how it feels in your body. Because for some people, they might have very, very strict boundaries. For other people, it doesn't really matter. Some people, it bothers them a lot if somebody's just, lighting up a cigarette without asking for permission. For other people, it doesn't really matter. So it's about how that happens for you, how that feels in the body for you when that happens. And that is the outer boundary. And what you will experience is that when somebody's crossing or playing with the outer boundary, it's very much about all the things we talked about in the second fetter, about fear, anger, guilt, and shame that comes up. And obviously, if you have things that needs your attention, go to the second fetter and work with it there on a deeper level. If you feel shame or you feel guilt about what has happened, look into that. Stay with that experience in your body. How does it feel to somebody's crossing your boundary and you feel shameful about it? Somebody's hitting you and you feel shameful about it. What's up with that? If somebody's saying something that is, meant as a joke, and you get so angry and it's rage that is just pouring out of you, what's up with that? So anything where you no longer feel the contentment and you no longer feel the equanimity, look into that with all the material that you have in the second fetter, with all the tools you have there. Work with that and stay with the body sensation of what is happening. And also use the bubble of reality to feel into what this actually is about. Because whatever you project onto other people that they should is something that you should. They should ask about permission first, okay? Look into where you are crossing other people's outer boundary. Look into which areas you do not even think that you need to ask permission before you take up a baby. Ask permission to the baby before you touch their body, It starts all the way back then. And if me saying that makes you go like, that is preposterous. A baby don't know about that. Are you so sure about that? With all the work I have done with people, a lot of what has happened to them is pre-verbal. So look into that. Just there's nothing right or wrong in this. It's just about feeling into the body. What happens when something like that happens? What happens when I'm saying that? Feel into that. And that is about the outer boundary. And remember, the moment you say, my family never respected boundaries. The outer boundary, we were beaten all the time, sexual abuse, verbal abuse, the lot, all of it. have never ever been taught to have proper boundaries. Remember the bubble of reality. If you have never been taught to have proper boundaries, you are a perpetrator all the time. And I'm not victim blaming here. I'm not saying that your experience is not valid. I'm just saying that you need to look at both sides, because both sides are there all the time. If you have had experiences with growing up in a family where boundaries was non-existing, and you have children, then you have raised your children where boundaries are non-existent. And if you've been so diligent with the boundaries in every single aspect, then you have overdone it, or you have left your boundaries and have been focused on their boundaries for them to have problems. So it's like anything you think of or you remember, or anything that comes up, as a thought or a feeling or an emotion, that is about something out there, about the outer boundary, where it's something about there, remember, it's only reflecting of what is going on in you, and it's only telling you what needs your attention in here. So you have the outer boundary, then you have the inner boundary. And the inner boundary is, it's the one where you talk with you, it's all the abuse you give you verbally. It's all the abuse that other people have given you. It's where shaming comes into it, where it's not so much about an action you have done. It's more about the person, who you are. Obviously, if you have had a full life where you have experienced blaming, where it goes very much about the things that you do, then you might have taken over that verbal abuse, and it's on your case all the time about all the things that you don't do well enough, and you could do better. So verbal abuse is about the inner boundary, and there's also psychological abuse, emotional abuse, intellectual abuse, spiritual abuse, that is here, and it's both from other people on the outside doing it towards you, but it's also very, very much about the abuse you give to you. If you have grown up in a family where boundaries was not a thing, then you have experienced verbal abuse as well. It's very rare. I've never experienced that somebody had a dysfunctional family where outer boundaries was not expected, but the inner boundaries absolutely respected. I've never experienced that. Obviously, if the outer boundary, it's in macro as in micro, what is in one area is in all areas. So if you have a story about growing up in a family where there was physical abuse, but we loved one another so much, you would need to look into that story. You would need to really listen into how you talk to yourself, because that is a copy paste of your childhood. So the inner boundaries is very much about how you speak to you and how other people speak to you, and you being okay with how other people speak to you. And again, I'm not saying that somebody says something, or you're stupid, and then you go into a rage. I mean, what's up with that? Other people are allowed their opinion. They can say whatever they want. It doesn't mean that you have to be a doormat. It doesn't mean that you need to take it in as being true, because it cannot be true. They're bubble of reality here. They're talking about themselves. But how you talk to you and what kind of abuse that other people are giving you that you are okay with is also very reflective of your inner boundaries. So it's also about, again, I want to say that if you have that very, very clear experience of growing up in a family where boundaries was not a thing, outer boundary, physical abuse, sexual abuse, all of that, all of it, didn't have any privacy at all with anything that I owned. People were stealing left, right, and center. Absolutely disrespect for other people's possessions and time and all of that. And then the inner boundaries as well, verbal abuse, psychological abuse, all of it. Remember, you are now the perpetrator. You are doing that towards you, and you are doing that towards other people. And if you really, really get that icky sensation in the body when I say that, And please breathe, breathe, breathe. This is the healing round. This is the round where we're healing everything that needs to be healed. And we're looking at it without any kind of judgment. I mean, who am I to judge you? Who are anyone to judge you? Who are you to judge you? The only feeling that can happen in you is compassion. You can just be kind and compassionate towards your experiences. And if you really struggle with being the perpetrator, then good for you. It's good to experience, it's good to become aware of that being a perpetrator is not something that you enjoy, that you would like to be, and you would like to become aware of this. The inner boundaries are also crossed, with when you give unsolicited feedback to people, when you give a good advice to somebody. And by now, you know that there's so many problems with that one. You cannot give anybody any advice ever, It's the bubble of reality. Whatever you think the other person needs to do, you need to do. Whatever you think the other person is doing wrong, you're doing wrong. It's very, very easy working with the fifth fetter. And that is like, from now on, should be a staple in your tool belt, that whenever you open your mouth, you listen. You listen. Because whatever you're saying, it's about you. Whatever you think is about the other person, whatever you're judging the other person for, you're judging you for. Look into that. Feel into that. What is up with that? Have compassion and kindness. Detach the thought. What is this really about? Feel into that. Another thing that I also want to bring up here, it's about the talking about other people behind their back. Sharing stories, gossiping. Sharing stories that is not your story to tell. That is crossing another person's inner boundary. It's both crossing the person you're talking about, it's crossing the person that you are talking to, and it's crossing your boundary. So it's like, and if you look at the culture that we have, we enjoy gossip. We have reality shows where people are backstabbing one another all the time. And the problem with it is that it's just really emphasizing the crossing of boundaries, where everything becomes very, very blurred. And then we need to have overreactions, like first we have, the crossing of the boundaries that is like horrendous, like we experience with apartheid, with slavery, with misogyny, homophobia, all of that, where we're crossing boundaries like so horrendously. And then there will be a kickback, and obviously neither are healthy. We need to get into the middle way, and that always starts with you. It always starts with you. If you're crossing other people's boundaries, you're crossing your own boundaries. You are a perpetrator towards another person, and you're a perpetrator towards you. And that needs compassion. Breathe. Feel into your body. How does that feel? If you're talking ill about Janice, how does that feel? Does it feel good in that moment when you're standing and talking, bad about Janice? Does it feel good in that moment? Why is that? Why is it that you feel better with Janice being worse? And just bubble of reality, my friend, everything you say about Janice is about you. You're blatantly showing everyone what you think about yourself. You're your own perpetrator. And that needs healing. And what you do is you stay in the body. In the moment when it happens, you stay in the body and feeling into what is actually happening. If you really want to work with boundaries, then go to the second fetter, to the lesson about the ego, the authentic, and the gap. There are lots of nuggets there. The material in the second fetter is made for you when you start with the first. All the insights about there is no separate self. Then you work with the second fetter, that is about all the emotional identification, all the feeling identification that we have, all the emotional indicators we have with fear, anger, guilt, and shame, all the trauma that we have had. You're working with that in the second fetter. But the material is also meant to, when you are on the second time around, that you can use it where you look at it from an anthropological point, where you're on the fifth floor and you see how people are acting out. So you kind of use it as a cheat sheet to see where the abuse happened and what the antidote to the abuse is. So obviously the ego side of that material, it's giving you a really good indication of where you are when you cross your own boundaries and when you cross other people's boundaries, because not respecting boundaries is happening out from an ego point, out from a selfing point, where you believe yourself to be more than the other person. You believe yourself to have an importance and an entitlement that the other person doesn't have, which gives you the right to cross their boundary. And it's also what is happening on the inside. When you talk to you in a certain way, that is what is happening. The bizarre thing is then that is the thought, the thinker, that is giving you a thought, about something. So it's the thought about a thought about a thought that is starting a little argument. And that's why you need to detach the thought and stay with the experience in the body. And it's very much about consent. Assuming instead of inquiring is crossing an inner boundary. Assuming other people's thoughts or intentions is crossing an inner boundary. You assuming anything is crossing an inner boundary instead of just asking, Yeah. And then obviously blaming, shaming, complaining, explaining. There we go, crossing the inner boundary. And everything that is us against them is crossing an inner boundary. Xenophobia, racism, misogyny, homophobia, all of that. Every ism is crossing somebody's inner boundaries. Because we're assuming something about other people. We're assuming that we know something they do not, and that is crossing boundaries. The last type of boundary I want to talk about, that is what I call the innermost boundary. And that is where, if you can imagine, we have the outer boundaries, you have the inner boundaries, and then you have a little kernel on the inside. That is the innermost boundaries. And that is the boundary that is being crossed when you experience gaslighting. Imagine you are in a prison camp, and imagine that you experience physical abuse. That is the outer boundary that is being crossed. If you are experiencing verbal abuse, or if you are being forced to shoot your friends and dig mass graves to them, that is, the abuse. But you still have a sense of self. You still have an I that is intact. That is the little kernel I'm talking about. The moment you are gaslit, the moment you are led to believe that this crossing of your boundaries is actually something you want, is actually something you prefer, it's actually something that is in your own interest and you chose this. So for example, if you get extra food or you do not get beaten up or anything, if you shoot your friends and bury them, then you are the innermost boundary has been crossed. And that is also what happens as children when we experience gaslighting, or in any type of relationship where you experience gaslighting, where you very, very clearly know that something is in a certain way, and then you're repeatedly being told that it's not, and also being told that you actually like this. So let's say you don't want to wear the shoes that you don't like the red shoes. You don't like the red shoes because they're too tight on your feet. You hate them, but you're being forced to wear the red shoes, and you're off to school or the party or whatever it is, And obviously you are laughing and having fun at the party, even though the shoes are really, really uncomfortable and really not nice to have to wear. And when you come home, your parents say, see, you enjoyed yourself with the red shoes. You really liked the red shoes, didn't you? You had such a fun time with the red shoes, didn't you? And then that little kernel starts to doubt reality. Starts to doubt do I like the red shoes? I did have fun. Maybe I do like the red shoes. Maybe the pain I have on my feet is not connected with the red shoes because I really like the red shoes, don't I? Don't I? I must have, because they said so. So that gaslighting that is taking place is dissolving the boundary to that little kernel of the innermost boundary. And when we in the first fetter and the second fetter talk about that, it's very, very important to have a very clear sense of self before we start to look into the non-dual part of it. That is why. Because you can very easily maintain a bypassing. You can very easily maintain a dysfunctional relationship to your body and doing the fetters all the way up to the 10th. Especially in the old traditional way. It's very, very easy to cross your boundaries. And that is obviously not what we want to do. We want you to achieve your freedom and your awakening, where everything is in equanimity in you, where you feel contentment in life. And no matter what is happening on the outside, or no matter what is happening on the inside, it's fine. You stay with it. Whatever is arising, you stay with it. That if you feel anger coming up, you're not letting anything out. You're not, copy pasting it on the outside and passing it on to others. You're not violent towards others verbally. You understand that whatever comes up in you is about you. There's something in here that needs to be felt. There's something in here that needs to be experienced, because the only reason we experience anger and frustration and annoyance and irritation and all of that, envy, resentment, anger, all of that, the only reason why we react with that, it's to avoid feeling what is happening on the inside. So obviously what we would like for you to do is to be brave enough to feel what is happening on the inside. Can you be in a body where whatever is arising is allowed to arise? Where whatever is arising, you stay with that. And then you feel into it. How does it actually feel in your body right now? And you start to experience that it's like there's small bubbles with their own little reality inside, their own little story inside, and that you can even unpack. It's like you can zoom in and zoom in and zoom in on lots of different areas. And that is what I mean with the house, with all the rooms in it that you can go into. So it's very much about really feeling into how it feels to be in a body that is experiencing all this. And all that needs to be in place before you dissolve the self. And it's so beautifully arranged that the body is refusing to dissolve boundaries until everything are solid. The body is refusing to really see through all the identification until everything is solid. Everything that needs your attention will be brought to the surface, and you will be made aware of it. That's why you hear stories about people that have passed all 10 fetters, and then 8 years later they turn back and lots of trauma to look at. That's why. It's also why we talk about the wheel of identification. It's not a ladder. We're going around, and with all the information you get from all the fetters, you can use all of it, because you're through all 10 fetters different times of the day, depending on what is happening and depending on which parts of you that you are respecting and not respecting. And the parts that you're not respecting is clearly the ones that you have boundary issues with. There's something in you that needs your respect. There's something in you that needs to be heard and experienced. Yeah. I think for a lot of women, we have areas in our lives where we have experienced our boundaries being crossed simply because of the patriarchy. I mean, it's how society is. You cannot open a magazine, you cannot open your phone without being told that your body is shameful. It wasn't until last year that they started to test sanitary pads, period pads, with blood. They have been testing it with blue liquid up until then, as if blue liquid and blood acts the same way. But it's like that we've been shamed, and then when you use the pad and you bleed, all over the place, you think there's something wrong with you. There's not. They just never tested the pads with period blood, or with human blood, animal blood, whatever. And I think that as women, we're so used to having our boundaries crossed that this is an area that you need to look into. Some really good books I can recommend you is Fix the System, Not the Women, Misogynation, Men Who Hate Women, Girl Up, Everyday Sexism, There is a Certain Place in Hell for Women Who Do Not Help One Another, and Invisible Women. Really, really amazing books that I can warmly recommend you, both for you and your daughters and your sons. So I'm going to link different books in the description that I can recommend you to read that are really good. And speak with your girlfriends and speak with other women if you need to talk more about the different experiences. All of us have areas in our life where we have no boundaries, where we are very, very unclear about what our boundary actually is. Not sure what we like or don't like in those areas, because we have experienced being crossed so many times that we don't know anymore. And those are obviously the areas that you need to feel into. You need to experience into how that actually feels, and remember that you have the right to change your mind at any point. That whole thing with if you said A, you also have to say B, that's not true. You can say stop at any point. So whatever you're doing, starting new job, starting new relationship, whatever you're doing the dishes, whatever, if you start to practice yourself with regarding your boundaries, feeling that body yes in you all the time, and the moment you start to feel, ooh, something is not right anymore, there's a body no coming up, stay with that body no. How does it actually feel? Detach the thought. How does it actually feel, that body no? And then you pay, I don't know what you call that game in English, where somebody's hiding something, and then you move towards it, and it's getting warmer and warmer, it's getting colder and colder. That is the game that you start to play with yourself regarding your boundaries, with feeling into that body yes, body no. Are you getting warmer into the body yes? Are you getting colder from the body yes? And use that body sensation into feeling into where your boundaries actually are. A way to divert from not having any boundaries, that is when we start to create walls instead of healthy boundaries. So on one side you have the absolutely no boundaries whatsoever. On the other side you have walls instead of boundaries, because for many people that is so much safer to have than absolutely no boundaries. And what we would like for you to do is work with getting into the healthy middle way, where you have healthy boundaries. If you have created walls instead of boundaries, it's very easy to see where they are. And there are different types of walls. The first one is a fear wall. You can see the fear wall when people are kind of like withdrawing. They're usually, picking their nails, biting their nails, picking around the mouth, holding the hands up against the mouth, so you can't really hear what they're saying, or they're holding their words back. They're the ones that are going home. As soon as the meeting is done, they're not staying and chatting and talking. Just remember that a lot of neurodivergent people, we are in that bracket as well. Where it has nothing to do, well, it can have something to do with fear. Obviously, not always though. It's where you avoid eye contact, you're turning your head away. that is usually connected with the chameleon. And another chameleon type is also where you kind of blend in with the wallpaper, where you're standing, at a function of some kind, meeting or whatever, and are, playing wallpaper, laughing when the other laughs, but have no specific opinion on your own, where it's more like a wall of silence, where you become invisible. That is the chameleon. The anger one is very clear to see, obviously, because they are always very, very loud. Very loud. They're acting with anger and attack. Very tight mouth. Lots of, tension in the jaw and in the bum. They're like a spring just waiting to explode. And then you got the wall of noise. The people that are just so loud. That are yelling everything. That is not talking at all. And they are talking so quick, and they're talking so loud, and they're not really in conversation with anyone. They're very much, controlling the conversation and the direction of the conversation. And the moment they're done saying what they wanted to say, they're off to the other people. So it's like really, really avoiding feeling the body at all. So they're making that huge wall of noise. And very often we are all for, So to sum it up, we would like for you to look into your boundaries, to feeling into how are you in the world? How are you towards other people? How are you towards yourself? Are you respecting other people's boundaries? Do you inquire instead of assume? Do you look for consent instead of just acting? And it also goes with yourself. Do you respect your own boundaries? Do you talk nicely to yourself? Do you treat yourself with respect? And if not, then remember in the third fetter, there's the full list of all the 10 things that needs to be in place for you to have proper self-care. So the first 3 of the care areas, it's the sense of self, it's self-care, and it's boundaries. And those 3 needs to be in place before we can talk about self-love and self-worth. And this needs to be in place before we can start to do any of the exercises in the 6th fetter. So what I would like for you to do this week is to really feel into your body. Are you completely clear on the body yes, body no? Are you completely clear on how you speak to yourself and how you speak to other people? Are you completely clear on the bubble of reality? Are you very clear on every time you have a thought or you have a vision, an image of something, every time you think you know what other people are talking about, you're assuming what other people are talking about, all that is about you. And if you have any questions, remember that every other Friday we have the Q&A. Become a member on the channel. It's kind of like a closed group where you need to be a member of the channel to join for the Q&A. Or come for the inquiry group every other Tuesday. And whatever you need to talk about, whatever you need help with in feeling into what is going on, feeling into those 3 layers of boundaries. Remember that at any point you can breathe, make contact with your body, feel how it feels to be in the body. Disconnect the thought about it, because this is about feeling the body, what is coming up in your body. How is the sensory experience right now? It's not what you think about the sensory experience. It's not about stories about the sensory experience. It is in your direct experience. What do you actually feel right now? Breathe into that and ask yourself, can I be in a body where this is present? I think that was it. Thank you.